All right, we're live. I didn't even hit the little animation because I'm so bad at starting the show now. I'm out of
It's been
practice,
too
Erin.
long. It's too long. I
I
guess we
know.
just have to make sure to get it on for next month. Right away.
So hello, hello everybody. Thank you for joining us. We're excited to have a new episode of DevRelish. And now that so my name is Brian Rinaldi. I lead developer relations at Local Stack. Now that Erin and I are not colleagues anymore. This is literally the only time I get to talk to
I know.
Erin. So why don't we just chat? You and I just
Let's
catch
just
up.
let's
Let's go.
catch up. Yeah. It's weird. But I still feel like it's weird. The world is small but big.
Yeah, it's true. So anyway, you want to do your introductions because I kind of stole your
Oh,
thunder a little bit there.
it's all good. I am Erin Mikhail Steeples. I'm a former colleague of Brian's, but I'm currently a developer experience engineer at LaunchDarkly.
So today we are tackling a question we've never talked about before, which is how you connect developer relations activities to actual revenue. It's never come up before. This question never
First
comes
time.
up. Yeah.
I actually
Uh,
don't know that this question is one like anybody's thought about.
yeah, never. So I think there's even uh it, there's you get some groans in the DevRel collective Slack if you bring this topic up. It's like, oh, this topic again. But it is an important topic, and we've got a special guest today. I'm going to invite Achin to the stage. So Achin is a co-founder of Reo.dev. And we're going to talk he and I had a really great conversation a few weeks ago where we talked about this topic quite a bit, and I was like, I wish we had just done it on the show, but we're going to try and revisit all those topics. But Ashton, why don't you introduce yourself first of all, and then tell us a little bit about your journey in tech and how you ended up founding Reo.dev and what Reo.dev does as it relates to our DevRel audience.
Sure, absolutely. So hi, Aaron. Hi, Brian. I'm Achin. I'm the founder and CEO at Reo.dev. What Reo.dev does is if you focus on developers as an organization, then it looks at millions of developer activities in your first party data, open source, third party communities, looks at all of them and very intelligently builds and converts it into a sales pipeline for you. So you'll know, okay, these are the organizations, people who are actively evaluating you today, and these are the ones who have just started researching on your product. And that all happens automatically using AI as a technology. About me, I'm a chemical engineer, so something that it's not so so common in DevRel as a world. But
No.
yes, I studied chemical engineering, specialized in computer applications in chemical engineering. Probably that's how I was introduced to the world of computers. Uh, learned a lot of programming, but in the world of fluid dynamics. Sorry, folks, but yeah, I mean, that amazing journey as in that, but then somehow got into the world of entrepreneurship. I think that um, um, that's probably what always wanted to do, and have worked only in tech startups across my career. Worked in a dev tool company, in fact, two dev tool companies, but the last one is one I co-founded. It was
Mm-hmm.
an API tool. We were creating like a universal API gateway, like one API to get all creators and freelancers data. I, as a co-founder, was heading revenue and business. And that is when I realized we had a huge bottoms up motion. A lot of developers signing up on docs, open source, etc. And as a revenue leader, I always kept on wondering that, yes, I'm getting a lot of it, right? I mean, but how is it making sense? Because I know my revenue signals are in this, right? I know that, okay, somebody's say, coming on my docs, but are they interacting on with a code command? Where are they active? There are a lot of people talking about us or topics relevant on Stack Overflow, but how do I put all of it together and sort of link it into a revenue pipeline? Because the signals were out there, but they were at different places. They were difficult to recognize, and they were difficult to put under an umbrella of an organization and if I could, and we used to do that on Excel sheet, put all the patterns of developers, rate them, weight them, put weightages, etc. It was a huge exercise, very difficult to know. But yeah, that is where I felt that this is something that could be solved.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think DevRel kind of our main focus is that kind of bottoms up motion, kind of bringing, expanding the top of the funnel essentially, and it's often we've talked. We were obviously joking in the beginning of the show because it feels like every episode ends up being like, okay, but my especially now that DevRel kind of like we took a little bit of a downturn. There's been a lot of like layoffs in DevRel space and people trying to kind of how do I protect my job? And protecting your job often is like how do I tie the things I'm doing, which is essentially like lots of bottoms up kind of activity, like lots of awareness stuff. How do I tie that to actual revenue? Like how do I tie my community work managing our Discord community or whatever, like to actual like things that lead to either expansions or new customers or anything like that. I mean, and it's often led to like very loose uh we're like, oh well, we kind of have these numbers and we think they may kind of make sense, but it's hard to really justify them in reality. So I mean, what would you how is it that you kind of tackle that issue?
Yeah, so like I mean, um, how I see DevRel as a function, and I remember speaking with some really, really smart folks who are in DevRel, and they mentioned that the role of DevRel, if you look at from a sales pipeline, there is a lot of it at the beginning and then at the end. So it's very unique about us as a function. Like if you look at any function in marketing or a sales or customer success, right? You can sort of slice and dice the sales funnel and sort of say that, okay, this belongs to you, this belongs to you, this belongs to you. But DevRel is something that spans at the beginning and at the end, because at the beginning you have a lot of these sort of folks who are trying to research about your tool, and you need to guide them, advise them, engage them, probably bring them, introduce them to a product, and that's one part of it. But then when people start actively evaluating there is sort of sales opportunity, that's where sort of that one developer whom you nurtured around a period of time can lead to $1 million deal, right? And that relationship, and the developer person is the owner of that relationship. So sort of my understanding here is that, I mean, should it be linked to revenue, right? It's probably a secondary question that matters and that differs from organization to organization. But the first thing to know is that there is tremendous potential to do it, and secondly, there is immense possibility to do it with data. So from a potential perspective, yes, right? I mean, by the end of the day, like one thing that is very well known in any dev tool company is like the single person or entity that can spoil or build $1 million deal is a developer, right? I mean, they have so much power in that, right? I mean, see the most senior of the organizations in the organization would like really be scared to disagree unless until they're a developer themselves with what a dev team is recommending, right? So definitely there's a lot of power, and then these are the people who trust DevRels, right? So now yes, so definitely there is a lot of potential in converting it into revenue. The possibility was, as I see, difficult in the like earlier, and the reason is that probably people were not looking at it from a data lens, and that is how we started seeing, I mean, can we add math to the art and say that there's so much of data out there, and essentially for developers it's actually out there, right? I mean, they'll be interacting somewhere or the other. It's not that it's on phone calls or some, I mean, probably it's somewhere out in the internet or on your first party data, right? So you have access, and you can bring all of it together to create mathematical models to show somebody that, hey, this organization is interested, and this organization is probably just researching. Don't bother the people there, nurture them, guide them, right? And hence you refine your DevRel playbooks based on the math that you see. across these patterns.
Well, and I'm curious to know there. So I fell into actually even coding through data science. Like I always tell people like I very much love it. Worked at a data ML ops world before I was at LaunchDarkly, and I think there's data to show and there's data to know. And I think if you talk to many data scientists, they always are like, I love working with them, but sometimes you're like, oh my goodness, here's the picture here, like nuance, broad strokes. So when we look at signals, like I think it's really easy to be like, I think of BuzzFeed, right? Coming back from like my journalism world, BuzzFeed for so long was heralded because it was like so many people were reading and sharing the articles, but like, does that actually contribute to the bottom dollar of like your quiz of what Harry Potter character are you most like based on these 7 cat pictures? Like that's not necessarily driving a bottom dollar thing, but likes and shares are great, but none of these people are paying us money. And so I think like,
Yes.
how do you define like the data to know versus the data to show?
Right. I think multiple answers, but one way is to look at patterns of developer activity. So how we see it's that if you look at from a developer's activity or life cycle, it always starts with a research for a tool, right? And at that point of time, like the activities, for example, if you translate into signals, somebody just started your GitHub repository, right? Somebody is talking about you on Twitter, right? And of course, these are not probably even the people. These are not probably the actions that convert into dollars, but then it creates like a top end of a funnel, just knowing about them, who they are, and what activities it's happening. The magic happens at the second stage, where once they start, once they are slightly matured in their research, and of course, at this point of time, they need support. But the movement and the action and the evaluation moves from a person to a team. And then when you start seeing in the same organization, multiple people in the last 15 days, 30 days have suddenly started showing activity A in a cohort of repositories, not your repository, but say 5 others whom you compete with. And it's all open data, right? So you can build the mat, build the models, put them together, right? All on your docs, or they're interacting with your code commands, they are logging in, right? So when you start putting it together, you start seeing that, okay, it has moved from a single person research to an organization. And hence you start realizing that, yes, there's a revenue potential. All the hard work that you have put in, right? Telling them, and you saw, say, an organization X, and probably one developer start getting active, has now translated into 7 developers in the last 7 days, right? And now there's an active evaluation. So, and then you see, there's a third stage where they start signing up, they start scaling, they start trying it out, etc. And your sales team gets sort of active in that case. And then you need, again, DevRel to sort of, because the same person was your champion, you had a relationship, he was active probably just on Slack, maybe one question 2 months back, but now they're actively evaluating, and you help take it to the last mile. So I think the guide, what we have felt key is that, and where most of the people make mistake is, if you have to look at a revenue lens, you should not look at leads, but look at accounts first. So triangulate all the activity under an account and start looking at account picture. Perhaps probably initially for stage, forget lead. And when you look at accounts, you start understanding the patterns and say, okay, where in that pipeline stage the account is. And then the next, once you understand, okay, this account is stage 1, 2, 3, then you start thinking leads and start building playbooks from a DevRel perspective or marketing perspective for the people there, because the contexts are very different. The timing is all that matters in DevRel and sort of Dev GTM. You don't want to reach too early, you don't want to reach too late, and that is that's how we feel that it translates better to revenue.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I've seen a lot of this since joining Local Stack, because at the core, like, the product is open source, and so like figuring out who's using it and what they're doing with it and things like that is very difficult, because it's just, there's a lot of avenues they can actually get access to the product without necessarily signing up, right?
Yeah.
So we've had this problem where he's trying to pick up these patterns of like, hey, this developer pulled the open source, this other one signed up over here, this other one's asking a question on Slack, and they're all, but it turns out they're all in the same organization. And if you knew that, you'd be like, oh, okay, they're evaluating us. But if you don't know that, it's just a bunch of random signals all over the place,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like, so, and it's hard to really put together. And I think to me, where DevRel fits in that is like, you're kind of involved in all these conversations. We're not trying to convert that into a lead, but without DevRel, the conversation on Slack might be silent. Whatever, content that drove them to the initial trial wouldn't been created. So I think it's really important at the same time tying that tying that back to like the signals that translate to an actual, like, sales motion is often difficult. So yeah,
Or
what you
even
said
like,
makes sense.
I was gonna say, like, I remember in my last company being open source, it was a lot of like, we had our biggest contributors were not ever anybody who came from a paying company, but were rather students and academic plans. And I was always able to be like, we need more, like, yes, they're not paying for the product, but like they're the largest contributors here. And like
Mhm.
that still provides business value.
Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure. I mean, I think it's definitely different, right? For depending on the
I
product.
I I have a story to add, but not from the DevRel world. Like
Mhm.
the biggest accounting software company in India
Mhm.
became big because they went to the commerce colleges, like the schools, and they taught people how to use their software in the schools, like to students, so that when they
Mhm.
graduate and when they join in whatever organization, they take the software along with them. And that playbook, right, they did around 15, 20 years back, and that has been like, so massively used. Now it's one of the biggest accounting softwares in the country. And yes, they started like you mentioned, Aaron. They started at the school level, and then sort of let them take it
Yeah.
to work.
I mean, I think that's one of those tough things too, is that a lot of, I think, to the point you're making there, which is that a lot of these
Mhm.
things are not immediate. There's no immediate payoff. Like I
Yeah,
can't, like, generally speaking, like in my years of doing DevRel, like it's hard to say, like, I did this and it immediately generated,
yeah,
the X
Mhm.
accounts and this much revenue, which is part of the difficulty, right? It's a lot of these are longer term plays. Like this will, you do this right, like that company investing in those students were not going to buy in the short term, but in the long term they were
Mhm.
going to buy, right? So, and they were willing to be patient, which I think is part of why suddenly we're like desperate for these metrics, because when things kind of took a turn, suddenly the patience for these longer term plays went away, and suddenly DevRel seems not the solution to my problem. I need immediate accounts, not accounts 2 years from now. So it's a struggle.
Yeah. I think, but like that's exactly like the point of like the GitHub education program, to like what you're saying is like GitHub education has done that. Like there's a lot of like getting in early, and I think there's just a familiarity. Like we all have, I don't like fond memories of like the tools we used earlier on, right? Like I think of Shopify Liquid was like the first code I ever wrote for pay, and like haven't touched it in years, but it's like something I learned early on that guides a lot of that. I think that's like a really great, you don't think like, it's very quick to dismiss those things because we're like, okay, why do I care about this? But like those are those early, foundations early on that does pay off. But I think of, when you think of time to first, whatever your first aha moment is, people don't like that. Like they don't want to be like, oh, it's going to take 3 years. Just wait for that to
yes,
happen.
right, right. And no, I agree, Aaron. And I think, I mean, that long an attribution is of course tough to sort of attribute that longer sales journey. But here is but here is the thing, right? I mean, if you look at from a advantage point of view, like you have created a loyal customer who, I mean, takes the stack across organizations,
Hmm.
right? That's
Mhm.
that's that's the first thing. Second thing is, um, there is no other way for the loyalty of a developer to get attributed without a DevRel program somewhere being
Mhm.
associated with it,
Mhm.
right? So somewhere or the other, right? I mean, otherwise, I mean, everybody knows if you just leave it, I mean, there has been no product that has just sold. I mean, by the end of the day, even the communities need some kind of fueling, sorry, and there is a lot of hard work that's going somewhere, right? So by the end of the
Mhm.
day,
Yeah.
if you look at sort of, these bunch of loyalists. So that's the first thing, right? That at some point of time, there should have been something that could have been attributed from a long-term point of view. But if you even look at from a short-term perspective, like if you look at any evaluation in any organization, be it open source product or a commercial product,
Mhm.
there is a big need in developers for some kind of a support, which is community support. I mean, it's not that they they are doing deep POCs at the later stage of the funnel, but a lot of these POCs that developers build for new technologies are mostly incognito. And at that
Mhm.
point of time is when they need support. And it is when the DevRels or the Slack channels, when somebody pings them, helps them out, is when they really move fast in completing evaluations with those technologies where they are supported. And that is where, I mean, those are technologies that are mostly chosen or recommended by developers. So even if you look
Yeah.
at sort of, like a more short-term engagement of support, right, it goes a
Mhm.
long way because developers' time is expensive, right? I mean, in fact, I mean, they have short windows of evaluation. They want to move fast. And in fact, a lot of it many times comes to which DevRel or support team sort of helped them first and identified them, right? And that is where, again, if you can convert all that traffic into an org and map them, then you will be able to intelligently categorize them, maybe just as an
Mhm.
SLA, right? Saying that, okay, this organization, I will quickly respond, help them out, ask them more. Maybe this, yeah, I mean, good,
Maybe there's
definitely we
something
should
there.
help, but if I have limited bandwidth, that's what I'll do.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, yeah, totally. I agree with that. And I think, and there's a difference between making DevRel be like revenue driven, right? And just finding ways to tie revenue to some DevRel activities to show the value of them. Like to me, it's like, and it is a bit of a slippery slope. Like if you start down one path, you may end up on the other, like where you end up being like, okay, now we've shown that we can contribute to revenue, and then they start putting revenue goals on DevRel, which then kind of defeats the purpose, I think,
I
because it
agree.
is a difficult balance. So yeah, but I also feel like I mean I've been doing this now for 15 years, and I've pretty much never had a role that didn't at some point or another start to be like, well, how can we put some numbers on this? How do we set goals that aren't very vague and loose? Because that's always been the problem. It's like DevRel goals is like, okay, why don't we put some, numbers on these things? And it's like, well, but I can't really track this and I can't really track that. And like, so like then it starts to feel like, well, then if you can't track it, what's the value of what you're doing? Um, and so, I understand the need to put some numbers on there, and dollar numbers are the ones that get the attention of the executives. So, if you're trying to like salvage your department, say, hey, you should not get rid of DevRel, tying some money to it that isn't like costs. I mean, because it's not a cheap program to run. DevRel programs are not generally inexpensive. So,
I guess
trying to tie that back is important. Go
I
ahead,
think
Aaron.
yes, yeah, I was gonna say tying it back is important, but I almost wonder, and maybe this is just me thinking through things, if the minute like this has to be a proactive situation, because the minute that someone starts questioning if if it's worth running, that's like
Yeah.
it's hard to say, like it's like ooh, because then your work becomes oh, am I like, how do I serve the developers? It becomes, how do I justify my existence, which is a very different job. Like it
Yeah,
needs to be from day one at the start. Otherwise, like it changes anything from like your product onboarding to how you're testing things out to the initiatives you take on. It's a very different type of metric.
absolutely. You're right. You're right.
Yeah.
And that's where it's like it's always a, I think like, when Achin and I were talking and I'm like, I'd
Mm,
love to see this to use a tool like Rio to like kind of be able to say take some of these signals and put some attribution to it in the long run. But ultimately it's not like really it's not purely like I don't want to be revenue driven as a team. I just want,
mhm.
because that would change the way we do our jobs. Ultimately, like you end up, you change whenever you set metrics, right, for goals, you end up kind of working towards those metrics for in ways that adjust the way you do things. So like you set a dollar goal and suddenly DevRel starts to kind of like, okay, well, how do I achieve that dollar goal? Um, it's not by doing community work because I can't, it's by, I don't know.
Whatever.
I don't
Yeah.
even know. Yeah, become like a a sales engineer instead, right?
Yeah. Which is a very different, again,
Yeah,
different role. And I think like this is like my big argument of I'm a big believer that like DevRel needs to be, if not on a product team, very, very close into a product team. Like I think like that's still something I see as like, super important because I think sometimes you get too far away. And it's like, yes, I do think it can work, but the type of the work that I believe is most valuable starts to wander, especially from like a product feedback. So I think like you're the first aha moment or the first win is a product win versus a
yeah.
marketing win.
So,
Tangents and rabbit
question,
holes.
do you? So, what are? I mean, what are some of the signals that you all like kind of look at, and in terms of, and thinking about like
Mm.
you talked a little bit about like community and GitHub stars, and what are some of the signals that you all kind of track to follow this path from a bottoms up motion?
Sure. So actually, the short answer is we try to do everything. But the bigger signals that we get, because I mean, logically, a developer journey could start from anywhere, right? And you ideally want to track that. But it can be divided into first party and third party. First party would
Mhm.
be your own docs, like huge signals. Like I mean, any developer who is looking at implementation would be looking at your docs. And how developers study docs is not, they don't consume content, they actually interact with content. They'll be executing code commands, they'll be installing a package managers, they'll be searching for things in the search bar. And these are the interactions that actually show intent. But that is one thing that we very deeply look at, like developer docs. I mean, if anybody just starts looking at docs as such, like tremendous information, and people generally don't do that. But that's what first thing that we recommend and we do ourselves. Second is of course product data, login, etc., post login. So that's the first party, right? Then we look at third party communities, go deep into communities, open source, GitHub, we look at a lot. We look at all your Reddits of the world, Stack Overflow, Slack, and others. And try to triangulate signals. So two kinds of communities, one which is more generic, open, and one which is owned by, say,
Hmm.
our customer. So, and yes, I think but yes, the goal is that if there is any developer activity which is out there in internet, there should be some way to bring it in and triangulate it under an account.
Mhm.
Is the goal that we try to achieve.
And so I'm assuming you kind of use
Mhm.
data to connect pieces that like, because one of the troubles is we only have like often a username
Yeah.
and things like that. So are you trying to connect that this same person on Discord is the person that started on GitHub and kind of put those pieces together?
Yes. Yes. So the first part of the problem is just solved by de-anonymizing it on an org level, right? I mean, because by the end of the day, of course, on an org level, there are a lot of signals. The second is, you're right, Brian, right? So GitHub ID to a LinkedIn ID. In fact, we worked on that enrichment, that algorithm to convert like a GitHub ID to a LinkedIn ID a lot. Because once you reach LinkedIn, you are able to know the organization of the person, the experience, etc., the designation. But yes, that I think was a tough bit, but that's where a lot of our engineering went into that piece.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, LinkedIn could
Yeah.
be a treasure trove.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. Yeah. I guess like LinkedIn is definitely the one that I see more active, but I think of the engineering manager that we've all interacted with that like is very offline. And then, has that been a big friction point for y'all or not really?
Yes. So Erin, are you saying that the developers are not on LinkedIn, or the buyer is not on GitHub? Is that
yeah, it's like the developer less on LinkedIn. Like the senior engineering manager is like, I'm super on GitHub, I'm active, I'm using the products, but like on LinkedIn, that's not my jam.
Yes, absolutely. And that's why if you see in the last 2-3 years, more and more developers are using their GitHub like a LinkedIn. So we get a lot of data of their organizations just from GitHub, right? So the idea is that, there would be some place, there would be, we will be able to learn the organization, map it, track it, right? And but yes, and the other thing is that even once you know the developer and who is building, right, under the realms of privacy laws, of course. But the other thing is that how do you reach out to the buyer, because the developer will not be taking the purchasing decisions, right? And that's the next level that we go to know that, okay, who could be the buyer if we once reach a LinkedIn profile or a person.
Yeah. I think Johan's comment is interesting about tracking docs in the EU. He said that, I'll put it back up. Tracking docs in the EU is so hard because everybody's opting out of cookies, which is interesting. Because I always feel like half those sites, like I'm like, I didn't actually click accept your cookies, and yet you're showing me stuff that you couldn't show me without cookies. But okay, so but I do think that's interesting. That I haven't really looked at some of the numbers of like, have you seen that as well, that in certain areas of the world, it's difficult to track some of these things, like in the EU, if people don't accept cookies, I can't necessarily track their activity in our first party stuff.
Yeah, there's definitely a percentage drop. So you see drop when people don't accept cookies. Actually, it's not just a EU phenomena. It's truly global in that sense. You feel, you see like the percentage of people who do not allow their cookies has only increased in the last 5 years. Not just that, developers, many of them would disable JavaScripts. And so definitely it's a privacy conscious sort of economy, and you have to respect that. But by the end of the day, what you're looking at is patterns of a cohort of developer activity in an organization to understand, okay, is that organization, does it have an opportunity right now? And then, yes, you might not be able to know as many people. There will be smarter ways to know that. But that's so yes, the percentage or the number of people who are not accepting cookies is increasing. But even if you look at the number of developers, that is increasing even at a more higher percentage. So the math, it's like we lose out less than we gain overall.
Yeah, I guess if it was the only signal, it would be problematic. But your assumption is that it's one of a number of signals. So if we lose that piece, we still got some data. And I agree that like even before the whole like a lot of the privacy stuff kind of kicked in the EU and other things. Like I was running a site that we built for developers that like I remember kind of figuring out at one point that the number of developers who came and basically had ad blockers on, but that killed any kind of tracking, like Google Analytics, whatever. Like we had no way of knowing. Like our numbers were way off, and much more so than anything I've run that like didn't target just developers. Like they, as a group, were more privacy conscious, I think,
Right.
because they build the tools that they understand the nature of it. But also, like, I always said, well, at best, this is, these are not actual numbers. We're looking for trajectory thing, on traffic. Like, not, this is not the actual like traffic number. We know this number is higher, but we just have no way of knowing what the actual number is. But we can see, like, if it's going in the right direction, that's at least somewhat of a good signal, even if that, which is why, like, I sometimes had like setting goals on some of these things, like exact numbers, when what you're looking for more is improvement, not like, I want to see this improve by X%, not like we're going to hit this number, because the numbers are often not necessarily totally trustworthy.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
the what to measure problem is a hard problem, and I think that's
Yeah.
and what is
Hmm.
successful is, and I think that's something that we ran into at Orbit is actually a free feature idea while we're here. This is something I always, when I was at Orbit, I was like, man, I would love to have this as like a personal thing. And I don't think that anybody's really built it yet. I always wanted the like, what is my individual impact as a developer relations expert? So I'd always be like, great, if I met with Brian and then Brian introduced me to so and so, I want to track that, but like be like, I was the catalyst for this action. And I think when we look at other tools or services, it doesn't tell that personal relationship story. And like, part of me is like, well, we shouldn't operationalize and monetize their relationships because that's like gross and scammy. But like, also, that is the way that people do business. We take referrals from our friends. We seek out private groups or forums. And like, there's the balance of like, this is how the role is done. And like, this is how business actually happens. But like, also,
Yeah.
it's a hard
So,
problem.
so Erin,
I don't know.
you're basically asking him to build DevRel Force, Salesforce for
Yeah.
DevRel.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, but like I'm like
That
also
will be
this is
so
why like I
awesome.
also don't want that because I don't want Salesforce because like I'm over here going like
Yeah, I mean, I actually don't think it's a terrible idea. Like, so much of DevRel, like, to me, the value you bring is in relationships, right?
Yeah.
Like that, that which is, I think, even to me, a big difference between me is like senior DevRel person versus someone coming, is I've had years of building these relationships that I can bring to wherever I go, like that. I've established trust with the various and connections in various companies and things like that. That, like, I think is valuable. That, it's when you're starting out in your career doing this, it's like, you're not going to have that. Um, Now my dogs are barking. I hope you can't hear them. So yeah, but point is, I do think tracking that to some degree is valuable, because just in terms of, like, I often find, like, at the end of the year, like, trying to figure out, like, okay, what was some of the things, like the value I brought in, and I don't have a lot of the things I do don't have a record anywhere. So, like,
mhm.
having a tool like Reo.dev, perhaps, or like other, where, like, there's a little bit of a record of some of the value, like, we brought in through relationships, is worthwhile, even if it feels a little, like, doesn't feel like, makes us feel a little more salesy. But as long as your goal isn't and you're not like trying to turn, your goal as a DevRel isn't like to build leads. It's building relationships. It's just tracking those relationships can still be important.
Right.
Yeah.
No, absolutely. And if you look at, like, I mean, I'm personally a big fan of data, and I feel that, like, I mean, personally identifiable information aside, just if you look at sort of the kind of data that's out there that can be tracked, right? Your relationships over a period of time, looking at sort of how they have evolved, your personal Rolodexes, where those people are today, right? I mean, it's an amazing thing, and honestly, I think that it's, I mean, yes, something like this is very useful for DevRel, but if you just look at sort of even for other function, right? Attribution is a huge problem for marketing as such, right?
Mhm.
Ads is some way. I mean, they are the closest to solving it, but still, like the biggest thing that we see so often is your marketing teams fighting with the SDR teams and saying that, oh, hey, this lead that converted, and the SDR team saying that, yes, I got him to a meeting, but then they are saying, yes, but we sent him an email and 5 email campaign sort of 3 weeks back and ran a LinkedIn ad, and hence he replied to your email. It's not, nobody gets converted from a single email, and everybody understands that analogy, right? But then the moment you translate in DevRel, right, something like this, I mean, I feel it should be more appreciated than what it is today. Because the same analogy, if we put it that way, that yes, something got converted, but the investment went back into it, and this is the way to look at it, measure it, understand it.
Yeah.
Should just create a lot more difference.
I struggled with that in a role that I was at a company named Progress Software, and that was where I built that site that I was telling you about. And one of the things we struggled with was there was no way to say somebody who visited this article bought a product, right? So like because the product wasn't like an online purchase, and even if it was, they rarely went straight from an article straight to purchase, right? That's just not the way the buying journey happens. And so like
It
we
doesn't. You don't
start
just read one post and
yeah.
automatically. Just kidding.
Some people do maybe, but like no, it's very rare. So what we started trying to do was figure out, like, could we place content on this site somewhere in the journey that they were on, like, so at some point between first signal of reaching them, of touching them, and like them purchasing, did they visit the site, like, and then did we, so we played a part in that journey. um exactly, like it's hard to like put numbers on it. I always think these like attribution numbers can be fuzzy. I always love like when we do these events, and like
Yeah.
the events team's like, oh, hey, we touched, you know, 3 million in pipeline at this event. It's like,
Right.
what does that even mean? I don't even know. Like, but I get it. I get the reason for the number, but like, point being, there is some value in kind of figuring out, did we
Right.
touch somebody in their journey, like
Right.
with our content or
So
whatever.
one way we try to solve is we build an organization's entire journey with your assets in the product. So if you log in into the product, you actually see, say, Netflix. If let's say that's an account, then you are able to see that, okay, what are the content assets they interacted with 6 months back, and of course, who is the person who wrote that content asset, right, and what they did with it, and then so basically, understanding an organization's journey, if you track it over a period of time, it starts making a lot of sense that, yes, whatever is happening today is because of the interaction of the content, the people in the past. Uh, yeah, I feel that could be an answer to some of these problems, right? That something got converted, and all that various teams get their due.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah. Everybody wants a piece of it. Every conversion is like, no, that was mine. Yeah. um, okay. Well, and I did, I'll show it again, but I did like Pat's kind of
Mhm.
comment here that just basically there is also like all that kind of weird stuff that just DevRel ends up getting sucked into. That's not like the it's it's not the kind of run rate activities, as I call them, like oh, we're speaking an event, or we get pulled into like interesting conversations and things like that, and just building awareness of that within the company is important as well, right? Like that's because it can often seem, I think, as a DevRel, like I think
yeah,
some of the perception is that, oh, hey, they're out there doing their own self promotion, like speaking at events and whatever, and there is some truth to that in some cases, but in most cases, like there's a lot of different things going on that aren't necessarily as visible as well.
Yeah.
All right.
All the
So
little stuff that adds up.
absolutely. Absolutely. And you know that, Erin, because this is like all the behind the scenes stuff. We're not like both Erin and I are like in reinvent prep time where it's like it feels like you get dragged into everything. Plus it's
Yeah.
fall, like conference season, plus it's like it's
Yeah.
a
It's all the little stuff that you're just like, where did this, how is it Thursday? How is it Thursday?
yeah. Reinvent, my favorite.
Honestly.
So I mean, yeah. All right.
But we can
Well, I
segue
think
it here with
we could segue it
all the
to
little stuff. Pickle facts, because it needs all the little different types of bacteria to ferment things.
That's a terrible segue, Erin, but I'll
I mean, go for it. Try it. Do you got a better one?
No, I don't. But but I think we'll go with it. That was a good attempt at least. Yes. So for those of you who follow the show know that we end every episode with a pickle fact. The name DevRelish didn't come wasn't really intended to be a pickle joke. But it was actually like
Brian
something
made the
I always
mistake of
say.
letting me commit to the bit. Brian made a mistake in letting me commit to a bit.
Yeah. I always just say like DevRel because DevRel is like often has a range of titles, and there's some roles that I've had that are like DevRel. I'm actually called developer advocate or in a DevRel team, and other roles where I'm like in a DevRel type role. They're DevRel-ish. That's where it came from originally, but then we went all in on the pickles. So so Erin, give us our pickle fact.
Yeah. Today's pickle fact is something brought to you by the state of Pennsylvania and the Visit Pennsylvania Tourism Association. Fun fact, they have an official state tourism sponsored fermentation trail, which I've actually bookmarked because this is a train ride away from me. And it has over 100 different stops and locations that have fermented food, laurels, and beer, wine, kombucha, pickles, and other sour flavors because of the go-to way they are known for cutting creamy or fatty food with acidity. So it is
So this is your next big vacation.
This is my next big vacation, is going to this, but actually there is a history of fermentation in Pennsylvania, I learned, because of the large amount of Eastern European immigrants to the area. But they now have a tour trail there.
Ashin, are you a pickle fan at all?
Yeah, a bit, definitely.
A bit, yeah. But you would not go on a pickle vacation. You would not be like, oh, I'm gonna hit the fermentation trail.
I would love to. I mean, just for the experience of it, right? I mean.
All right, Erin. Well, when you go, you will. I think this sounds like you could just call it a business expense to be like, oh, I did it for the show. I
did. I needed to do research. Very important. I mean, they have three other culinary trails, I guess, for Pennsylvania. It's like a whole thing. They're doing their tourism department. But let's be honest, pickling's a cool one. They also have charcuterie that could be good, apples and grains. But let's be honest, I'm into the pickle one.
All right. Well, when you do go, you'll have to come back. We'll do an episode where you report on your pickle trail.
My entire 100+ stops of pickling.
Yeah. All right. Well, this was a really fun conversation, Achin. Thank you for joining us. I think it's definitely a complicated topic to talk about as it relates to DevRel. But I think it's been really valuable getting your insights and kind of how you, especially from a data perspective, how we can start to look at things in terms of DevRel activities. So thank you so much.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.
And thanks to everybody else for joining. We will be back. Well, we haven't scheduled anything, but we'll be back next month, right, Erin?
I think we'll catch you. We'll see you. We'll see you around.
Yeah, I mean, otherwise I don't see you. So yes, we'll be.
Yeah, we have to. You just have to come hang out with us.
Yeah, so we'll be back next
month. How
month.
was the expense night travels?
Look for schedule details on cfe.dev. as well as we have a bunch of other upcoming events as well. So please follow us there, and I'll see you all later. Bye.